Welcome. Glad you're here. We'll get started in just a few minutes. There might be a few other folks that trickle in, but a lot of people emailed me and asked for the recording. So they weren't able to attend tonight, but want to still know what's going on and hear a little bit later. Hi, Francis. Glad you all are here. While we wait to get started in just a few minutes, I invite everyone to introduce themselves in the chat, especially since we're a little bit of a smaller group. If you want to go ahead and put your name, pronouns, faith community, and then the native land you're calling in from. And my colleague Kate is going to put a link in the chat as well that you can look up the native land that you're on if you don't know where you are. Go ahead and put an example in the chat. Janet, how is Spokane weather? It's very sunny out here, so.
Beautiful day today.
Mm,
Stunning. Gorgeous.
it's like it's spring, you know?
It may become spring.
It
Yes.
may be spring, yeah. Okay. And while folks are putting their info in the chat, we'll just give it a minute or two more in case other folks join. But we may be a smaller group tonight as well, since a lot of folks let me know that they and live tonight but wanted to receive the recording later. Which is the good thing about doing Zoom events is that, you know, they're more accessible to everyone. Kate, can you go ahead and throw that link in the chat again for folks who have joined? We'll get started in just a couple minutes, and in the time, folks are introducing themselves in the chat with name, pronouns. Oh, I forgot to put my pronouns in the chat. That's okay. Faith community, and then the native land they're calling in from. And Kate has put a link to a cool map that I highly encourage everyone to check out, a great online resource that shows the native peoples of the land that you're currently on. All right, we may have a couple more folks join, but let's go ahead and get started. Make sure I've got my tabs in order. Okay, thanks everyone for coming. This is going to be our legislative session update briefing, and we may not go the whole hour. It really just depends on what questions you all have. So we at Earth Ministry WAIPL, we like to start off all of our events with a land acknowledgement, including both folks writing in the chat like you all have been, and then also reading out a statement. Earth Ministry WAIPL works within the unceded territories of Northwest Native nations. Our office is on the traditional land of the first people of Seattle, the Duwamish people past and present. Land acknowledgement is one way to resist erasure of Indigenous histories, as well as to honor tribes and the land itself. Resist erasure, not erase. That would have been bad. Thanks, all. And for those of you I haven't met, you may have seen my emails. I'm Maddie. My pronouns are they, them. And I am currently the operations manager at Earth Ministry WAIPL, but have been covering our advocacy work in the interim while we go through a hiring process for our next advocacy point person. And my colleague Kate is also here helping out with some of the tech for tonight. Kate, do you want to just say hi? Her video is not working, but she's here.
Hi, yeah, my name is Kate, and I'm gonna help with the tech, and I am the Service Corps volunteer. So happy to be here with you all.
Hmm. And then I also just want to give a quick shout out to Janet Farness, who's one of our board members, one of our Earth Ministry WAIPL board members. Janet, do you want to give a howdy, say hi?
It's great to be here. I think, Maddie, you're doing a terrific job.
Oh,
And
thanks.
It's fun to say a shout out here from Eastern Washington.
Yes,
So,
Janet is in Liberty Lake, just east of Spokane.
Great to be here. And I really appreciate all the advocacy alerts. It helps me point my energies in the right direction as well as point others' energies in the right
there's
direction.
a lot of things to track during the legislative session. For a quick roadmap for where we're going today, I am going to mostly spend a lot of the time going over our specific legislative priorities and that you may or may not know about and where they are in the legislative process. This year is a long session, so it doesn't end until April 23rd. And so we have about a month left of the legislative session. And then if there's time and you all have questions, we could talk a bit about, I know sometimes folks have questions for me about like, how do we best navigate the legislative website to like use the information and get information. And if there's time, we can talk about that too. Okay, I'm gonna share my slides. All right, it's popping up for everyone. And I'll just say I'll stop a lot to answer any questions you all have, but also feel free to put questions in the chat and Kate will flag those for me and stop me intermittently if I don't see them right away. So feel free to, ask whatever questions you have. And Kate's also going to put a link in the chat for this, but a great place to keep track of what's going on in the legislature is our legislative priorities webpage, which we update every business day. And so that we have both the list of all the bills and budget priorities that I'll be talking about. And then also like actions and like steps they've taken through the legislative process. So you can kind of see like where things are at, what might be the next action item, etc. And one thing Janet was talking about that a lot of you are signed up for this, I think, legislative alerts, which include sort of the same information that's on our webpage, but digested down to know like, okay, these are the specific actions that we're having this week on these bills. These legislators need to be contacted if you live in these districts. So it's a quick and easy way to follow along. And that's an opt-in email list that we have a form that you can sign up for. And a lot of you might already be on that list, but those emails generally go out every Monday. So another thing I just wanted to highlight really quickly is the calendar for this legislative session. And so the last day of the legislative session is April 23rd, but in order for a bill to get passed and continue along in the legislative process, it has to get past certain points in the session by specific dates. And so the cutoff dates, these are called cutoff dates. And the ones we've already passed are here in gray. For example, March 8th, about a week and a half ago was the House of Origin cutoff date, which meant that bills had to pass the first chamber they were introduced in. And if they didn't, then they wouldn't be moving forward in the process for the rest of the legislative session. And so it's at these cutoff dates that you'll see bills start to bills die, where they won't be able to be considered for the rest of the session. And we have one coming up next week, which is the opposite House Policy Committee cutoff, which is where bills that have already passed through one chamber of the legislature will then have to make it through the policy committee of the other chamber. And I can answer any questions about that if that's confusing, but like these are the sort of dates that we look at in terms of going to be actions needed from grassroots folks like you all in order to, you know, build some last minute support to try to get bills or budget items through.
For me, Maddie.
Yeah, Janet, go ahead.
Well, I'm new at this, and
Yeah.
I just want to say I really appreciate all of the just breaking it down so well. Even these dates,
Good.
I've heard of the dates and I've gotten the dates, but just to lay it out what the dates actually mean is great. So thanks for that.
Yeah. Awesome. And then you'll notice that April 12th is the opposite house cutoff, except for budget. And so I'll note that all of these cutoff dates don't apply to things that are in the budget or that are necessary to implement the budget. And like these cutoff dates really just apply to certain bills. And then because this is also a budget year, we also have budget priorities that I'll talk a bit about. And so pretty soon there'll be the House and Senate will be releasing their versions of the budget. And so in this long session, they try to get all of the bills that aren't part of the budget need to get passed by April 12th. And then they spend that last part of the session really focused on budget negotiations and getting closer to passing a budget. Okay, so first I'll talk about, I figured I would start with some of our bills that aren't moving forward for the rest of the legislative session, so then we can end on a high note with the things that are still moving forward. So this year we had 4 top priority bills, and this is one of the bills that, you know, didn't make it through one of those early cutoff dates, and so isn't moving forward this year in its original form. And that was the Environmental Justice and the Growth Management Act bill. We have 2 priority bills this year that are Growth Management Act related. One is climate and one is environmental justice. So like sometimes those get confused with folks because they're both have to do with the GMA or Growth Management Act. They have slightly different focuses. And this one specifically was on environmental justice and was put forward by our partners at Front and Centered, which is a coalition of people of color led environmental justice organizations in Washington. And we, you know, really try to listen and follow sort of their guidance in terms of what impacted communities that are represented by the organizations that are part of Front and Centered, what their priorities are for the legislative session. And this was one of their bills that they ran this year. And this was the first year this bill was introduced. We often find that it sometimes takes a couple of years for bills to get through to finally being passed in the legislature. Just to build more momentum and have more legislators, you know about it and prioritize it. And so this bill didn't get through this year. It didn't make it through the Senate Ways and Means Committee on the first fiscal cutoff date. But apparently, and I need to talk to Guillermo at Front and Centered about this, but because there was such widespread support for the bill, there's there's real possibility that some of the things that were in the bill could get funded in the budget this year. So I need to learn more about that, but it's a bummer that the bill didn't get further, but the fact that like some of the things that were important in the bill could potentially still be funded this year. Yeah, and hopefully we'll have more info about that to update the WAIPL community. Their top legislative priority that won't be moving forward any longer this year is the WRAP Act, or I love this acronym, or the Washington Recycling and Packaging Act. And this is the big recycling bill. And you may have heard about it before. It also was a bill last year, but had a different acronym called RENEW. So last year it was the RENEW Act. This year it's the WRAP Act. And what this would do is establish a extended producer responsibility program, which basically takes, right now, individual people and just everyday folks are paying most of the cost of recycling things in our state, and a lot of places don't. Like if you actually look at some of the stats and numbers about what actually gets recycled in our state, it's fairly low and was definitely surprising to me. And so this bill would have sort of revamped that system and added EPR, or extended producer responsibility, which puts a little bit of that cost onto the companies that make packaging, and also, provides incentives for them to make packaging that's compostable or easily recyclable, and instead of some of the stuff we have now, which like you shouldn't need a degree to like figure out what's recyclable. And this bill would have also established a bottle deposit program. And you all may have seen we sent out an action alert about the WRAP Act a few weeks ago before the March 8th House of Origin cutoff date. And that we got like over 100 folks who responded right away that day to write messages to their legislators and say like, listen, like we really support the WRAP Act. Can we get it through this cutoff? And ended up not being able to make it through the House for cutoff, but it had such wide support that I would be really surprised if it didn't pass next year, just based on the support that the bill has, especially among grassroots activists that are talking to their legislators about this. There was a little bit of drama right at the end of trying to get this bill to a vote on the House floor. And the problem was opponents of the bill added 24 amendments to it. And that is a problem when you're going up against time. You have a limited time to like pass bills on the floor before cutoff. And yeah, and like for every amendment that they have on a bill, if you want to bring that bill to a floor vote, it takes up, like our partners were telling us, it's like roughly about 10 minutes per amendment. So like if you choose to hear a bill on the House floor that has 24 amendments, like that means that many other bills won't get a chance to make it through cutoff. And so I think leadership really had to weigh like, okay, like what has to get through, this year. We also got some intel that it was the bottle deposit program that was the most controversial part of this bill. So it'll be curious to see in the future if they run just the EPR, extended producer responsibility part of the bill, or if they like try to still combine it with the bottle deposit. So I'll be curious to see what happens next year, and we'll definitely, keep folks engaged. Communities we're really excited about would be a big deal. So any questions about bills that haven't passed or moving, and then I'll get to the stuff that you can still take action on. Okay, well, I'll just keep rolling then. All right, so is one of our top priority bills that is still moving in the legislature, that we're really hoping will get passed this year. So this is the other Growth Management Act bill that I was talking about. This specifically has to do with climate. I think the Growth Management Act is from like the 90s I was reading, and what this would do is update that language to also require counties and cities to address resilience and climate change in their land use planning. And this bill is one of the top priorities of the Environmental Priorities Coalition this year, which is we're a part of, but is made up of a lot of all of the like big environmental organizations, and most of them in the state are a part of the EPC, or the Environmental Priorities Coalition, but then there's lots of other smaller ones like us that are too. So everyone is sort of almost everyone in the environmental community is working on this bill this year, and it nearly passed into law last year, and like dramatically died on the last day of session last year. So I think folks this year are really like, we have to get this passed. And so that it seems to be rolling along fairly successfully without too many speed bumps this legislative session. And actually it's already made it to its Senate Fiscal Committee. So that means that it was introduced in the House and passed its House Policy Committee, then passed a House Fiscal Committee, and then was passed on the House floor, and then went to the Senate, went to its Policy Committee in the Senate, and then was moved, and then was shifted to the Senate Ways and Means Committee, which is a fiscal committee in the Senate. So it's rolling right along, which is exciting. And actually, we have an action item that we can do together, that Kate has put in a link in the chat. And so one of the cool ways that our community has been able to, oh, hey, Bruce, thanks for joining.
Been here for a while.
Awesome. I just couldn't see you.
I can't see myself either.
So one of the things that sort of shifted in the legislature during the pandemic is the ability to sign in support, to like state your support or opposition to a bill for the record when it has a public hearing in a committee. And so the way this used to work was previously you had to be on the Capitol campus in Olympia, connected to the Capitol campus Wi-Fi in order to like register, not only to testify for a hearing, but also to like just state your position for the record. And then during the pandemic, when the legislature went virtual, folks from all over the state were able to sign in and just say like, I support this bill. Here's my organization affiliation or my faith community affiliation. And that's now, there is back in person this year, but they've kept what I think are some of the best aspects of how the legislature was able to become a bit more accessible to folks in the state. Because not everyone can take off work and go drive down to Olympia, you know, like that's mainly the folks who had been there had been our lobbyists. And this way is a way for folks to participate in a way other than just writing your legislator and saying that you support this bill. So this Climate GMA bill, HB 1181, has a hearing on, gosh, what day is it? Thursday? Today's Tuesday. Yep. So there's a hearing on this bill in the Senate Ways and Means Committee on Thursday. And the link Kate put in the chat will take you right to this page. And I'd love for everyone to just take a second and fill it out. And so it'll ask you, like what's your position. You can put pro. I've already signed in for this bill, so I won't do it again. And here under organization, if it says if you are testifying as an official representative on behalf of a particular organization, please specify. That doesn't mean that you're actually testifying. That just means that you're stating your position. So like, since I stated our position officially from Earth Ministry WAIPL, I put Earth Ministry WAIPL here. But they don't count folks separately. If you like, if all of you put Earth Ministry WAIPL and I put Earth Ministry WAIPL, they would only count that as like one organization supporting it. So what we encourage our folks to do is to put like member of your faith community or like person of faith under that. And so then you're counted as like an individual while also showing that like you're part of the faith community supporting this bill. Jane.
I was just wondering, like, would this be, I know there's certain things that we can't do as part of a faith community, or, otherwise we're thought of as being advocate, certain kinds of advocacy. But I'm not sure I know all of the different parts. Maybe it's that you, and so the other thing is, I'm not sure, since I haven't brought this up with my group, I'm not sure. I'm thinking I may just have to do it for now for myself and then find out from them. So I'm just wondering how others have done it. This is my first time in the past.
Good question.
Is it a problem with faith communities to do something like this?
Yeah, good question. I'm really glad you asked that question. So generally, faith communities that are nonprofits, just like Earth Ministry WAIPL is a nonprofit, you can't do electoral work, which means you can't endorse a candidate or basically you can't tell people to vote for a certain candidate or endorse a candidate. But you're not limited from, like, you can absolutely, as a faith community, talk to your legislators about things that matter to you and bills that you want passed. The only thing that governs that for nonprofit status or faith community status as a nonprofit is you can't do direct lobbying over a certain amount. And it's the threshold is very high. And so even at Earth Ministry WAIPL, as an organization that does advocacy work, we don't come close to doing too much lobbying to affect our nonprofit status. So most faith communities, the vast majority of your time and money is spent in building your own community or and paying your staff. And so I don't think you would ever need to worry about that in your specific faith community. And we have a lot of our faith communities that have folks that get together and do advocacy together, or we present a lot of workshops just like this one to our faith communities. And I can send you resources if that's helpful too.
Oh, that'd be great. And then, so I guess what I do is I'll just do it on my behalf, won't put their name, and then ask them, bring this up during one of our meetings. When does this need to be done by?
So this committee hearing is Thursday at 4 p.m., which means they will close this sign-in at 3 p.m. on Thursday. So it's a fairly quick turnaround. But what I would encourage you to put is, instead of putting the name of your congregation, so for example, I am a member at University Unitarian Church. And so what I would put on here is I wouldn't put University Unitarian Church, because as a congregation, we have a specific process that we have to take a position on something. But I would feel totally comfortable putting member of University Unitarian Church, because that doesn't imply that I'm speaking for the whole congregation, but shows that I'm part of a community and that we gather around shared values.
Okay, and so others dealt with this before? Is it okay? Do you have to go back to your congregation to make sure they're okay with doing it? Or
I mean,
they're
if you
okay if you
wanted
just
to,
remember?
yeah, if you wanted to sign in on behalf of your congregation, um,
Right.
like you would need to follow a policy of that. And so I won't say that we have very many congregations that like do advocacy that way during the legislative session. It's more like individuals who are members of that community will do advocacy. And we have had congregations get involved in ballot measures and stuff before. Janet, did you have a question?
Oh, no, I just wrote, oh, I'm sorry, maybe the other Janet.
Janet
beg-
C,
Go
yeah.
ahead.
Oh, you're muted, Janet.
Okay. In signing one of those pro documents, if you have already done it, would it reject you? You know what I
No, if you have already signed it, it will let you sign up again. And there's just always like so if you've already signed in pro in favor of this bill at another public hearing, you absolutely should still sign in pro at a later public hearing, since like these bills often have at minimum usually 4 different public hearings in the different committees as they move through the process. So if you can't remember if you signed in, you absolutely should still sign in.
Great, thank you.
Okay. All right, let's go back to talking about some of our bills. Okay, I think it's popped up for you all now. Our other top priority that's still going strong this legislative session is the Toxic Free Cosmetics Act. And what this would do is ban PFAS, which if Earth Ministry WAIPL has done quite a bit of work on PFAS the last couple years, which I'd encourage you all to check out on our website. But PFAS are like nonstick chemicals, so think like Teflon or Scotchgard. And they are really good at being nonstick chemicals, but they also happen to be toxic and to last in the environment for a long time without breaking down. And so what this bill would do is, you wouldn't think this stuff would be in cosmetics or personal care products, but it is, and including a lot of other hazardous chemicals like phthalates, formaldehyde and formaldehyde releasers, and even lead. So we've been working on this bill mainly with our partners at Toxic Free Future, which is an organization that focuses on chemical safety and chemical safety reform. And we've done a lot of work with them over the past 10 years or so, I would say. And they've actually done quite a bit of testing that shows that personal care products and cosmetics that are marketed to women of color often have much higher levels of this toxic stuff in them than do personal care products or cosmetics that are mainly marketed to white women. And so it does become an environmental justice issue there. And so this bill would ban all of that stuff in all cosmetics and personal care products sold in the state of Washington in 2025. This bill actually had an executive session today in the Senate Environment, Energy, and Technology Committee. And the way the legislative website updates is for a while it just says executive action taken, but it doesn't show you what it is. Unless you're like online watching TVW as they vote, which I don't have time to do, sadly. But our partners at Toxic Free Future said that they weren't worried about this bill getting through the Senate Environment Committee, and that the main issue would come when it's about ready to go to the Senate floor. And so we'll be doing a big push then to the Earth Ministry WAIPL to community when it's about to go to the Senate floor to get folks to write to their state senators and ask them to vote yes and make sure this passes with its strong provisions as written and doesn't get watered down. And this bill also was introduced last year. Last year was the first year it was introduced. And so this is the second year and is another example of, important bills don't always, even though they're really important, don't always get passed the first year they get introduced. And so this is the second year and we're really hoping to have some success this year. Any specific questions about this bill? Great. Okay, it's pretty simple. We shouldn't poison people is what I like to tell, how I market it to folks. Okay. So since this is a budget year, we've also, we're supporting certain budget items and the budget negotiations get fairly wonky. And so we often rely on our partners who are able to have policy staff and lobbyists in Olympia to keep track of all these budget negotiations because, as you can imagine, there's so many different things that have to go into passing the state's budget. And so a couple of priorities that we are focusing on along with our partners is investing in climate action, which sounds rather vague, but this year, specifically for the budget, it has to do with, clear definitions about what does an overburdened or impacted community mean in terms of like who gets funding, who gets extra funding in their communities as a result of the climate, which you may remember the Climate Commitment Act is Washington's new cap and trade bill law that's now in place in our state. And actually the first auction for pollution allowances was earlier this month. And this budget item also has to do with implementation of the HEAL Act, which is a bill we helped pass a couple of years ago that mostly has to do with requiring big state agencies like the Department of Ecology, Department of Health, I think Commerce is in there too, maybe, and requires them to like think about and so that has some funding pieces with it as well. And so Front and Centered is also cares a lot about this funding, as you might imagine. And so they're talking about, making sure the money is there to fund things that have been passed already. And this is also a priority of the environmental priorities. Yeah, Bruce, did you have a question?
No, you just cut out for a minute there. And
Oh,
your
whoops.
lips were moving, but the voice wasn't coming through, and I thought maybe you were having an attack. I wasn't sure.
Oh, well, I am well, so I'm glad all is well. Thanks, Bruce. Okay, and there's also, if you're interested in the specifics of what we're asking for in terms of investing in climate action in the budget, we have a link on our legislative webpage. We have a link to a fact sheet that there's a couple fact sheets. Oh, excuse me, one from Front and Centered and one from the Environmental Priorities Coalition that really go into detail of like, we want this much money for this and this much money for this. And so like, there's a lot of, as you can imagine, there's a lot of different things that I don't really have capacity to keep track of every tiny little climate thing we want in the budget. But those fact sheets provide some more information about what we're talking about in terms of that. Okay. One of the other budget things we are supporting is there's several really crucial, important budget items that need to be funded this year that are really important for lower Snake River salmon recovery. And so one of the three main things, which we also have more detail on our website about, are a transportation study, the Lower Snake River Dam Energy Plan, and then irrigation analysis. So from what I've heard from our partners in the Northwest Salmon Restoration Campaign and at the Save Our Wild Salmon Coalition, is that generally there's pretty widespread support for the Lower Snake River Dam Energy Plan and the irrigation analysis. And the little hiccup is the transportation study. And the problem is we only have a certain amount of time to figure out before Snake River salmon will likely go extinct. And so that is like, we're sort of working on crunch time. And so that's why it's specifically important that we get some of this stuff funded this year. Specifically, the transportation study would look at like how grain is moved to market. Currently, some of that grain is barged down the Snake River, which the dams are needed to be able to do that, but less is barged than it used to be. And so what we want to do is look at, okay, what are some ways that we can still make sure that farmers get their grain to market at a reasonable cost that doesn't necessarily mean you know, sacrificing tribal treaty rights or salmon populations. And so actually we have another action item for you all that you all actually get the sneak peek at this because we haven't sent it out to our wider community yet. And so the coalition that we're part of, the Northwest Salmon Restoration Campaign, is collecting a petition that will be delivered to all of the legislators that are work on the budget this year, and specifically the transportation budget, since we're most worried about that transportation study. So I think I was hearing recently that the last week of March and first week of April is usually when the House and Senate transportation committees release their versions of the transportation budget. And the chair of the Senate Transportation Committee, Marco Elias, is very supportive of this transportation study. And the problem is in the House Transportation Committee, where the chair of the Transportation Committee, Jake Fye, is not quite as, he's from Tacoma, is not quite as supportive transportation study. So Francis, I don't know what district you're in, but this could be, I might email you about your representative.
27.
Okay, yep, that's it. And so
Jake Fye is the
yeah,
bad guy. I'll write him.
well, we're also going to be delivering this petition to him. I wouldn't say he's the bad guy. I would just say that he needs to, you know, folks need to let him know about this. So I'd invite folks to fill out this petition. We'll also be sending it out to the wider Earth Ministry community. And this is all about the salmon budget priorities and making sure that, you know, we fund these important things on a timeline in order to get these studies done on a time that doesn't mean that salmon will go extinct before we have all this figured out. Yeah, and feel free to share it with others in your faith communities. And then we'll be doing some emails out to the larger community as well this week to make sure folks know about it. And I think the deadline to sign this petition is, we're delivering the names to our coalition partners. So it'll be like a big delivery of all these petition names on March 31st. So coming up fairly soon, but we figured, you know, the faith community cares a lot about salmon recovery and making sure we get this right and do it in a way that keeps all communities full. Okay, any specific questions about the budget? The budget is fairly complicated. I would say that's the area of legislative work that I still need to learn a bit about. And we're lucky to, you know, do this work with coalition partners who are able to follow those things in detail and let us know when support is needed. Yeah, Bruce.
I have a sizable group of people in our congregation who are also very concerned about the gun bills. And can you tell us where they?
Gun bills?
Yeah, there are two bills that one was outlawing guns of mass destruction like the AR-15s and so forth. Another one was improving the registration and so forth. There are two of them in there that are of great concern to people right now.
Yeah, I would, I only have capacity to track a small portion of the environmental legislation. Like there's a lot more good stuff out there that we just don't have capacity to track. In terms of other issue areas, I would go I was going to say Faith Action Network is probably a good resource for that since they do work on gun safety issues. Be my bet for where to go searching about that.
Okay,
I know some of those bills have been fairly high profile this year, so you should be able to find some information about it. Okay. We have just a couple more things I want to touch on, but I know we're almost done. So, I spend most of our time on the legislature focusing on our top priority bills that I talked about previously, but there are also other bills that we like to track and follow and give our folks opportunities to weigh in on. It's really, there's so many like good environmental justice and climate justice bills that we would like to support in the legislature every year. And it's really just a matter of capacity of like, okay, where can the faith community be most impactful and strategic? And so one of the other bills that we're supporting this year that's also still making its way through the legislature is the Preventing High Heat Disconnections Bill, or HB 1329. And what this would do is on days where it would prevent utility companies from disconnecting folks from electricity and water. And this is mainly meant to like make sure folks can survive on the increasingly hot days we have every summer as a result of, living in a time of climate change. And this would also reconnect folks who may have already been disconnected back to the grid or to water for those specific days when the temperature is really high. And you may remember there was a version of this bill ran last year. It was called Energy for All and that had to do with all utility disconnections, not just during high temperature days. That bill did not pass or move forward, and the legislator who introduced that bill is no longer in the House. But a version of that bill that has to do with, okay, let's just at least start with preventing folks from being disconnected on high temperature days. Bill is doing fairly well this year. So it also had a public hearing today in the Senate Environment Committee. And so the next step will be for it to hopefully pass the Senate Environment Committee. And then it actually doesn't have a fiscal part to this bill because it's not spending any money. It's just telling utility companies like, this is what you have to do. And so it doesn't actually have to go through a fiscal committee. And so as soon as it passes, hopefully the Senate Environment Committee, then it would be essentially Senate floor. But we'll keep folks updated on this. This is the only bill of ours this year that doesn't have to go through a fiscal committee, which is kind of fun. So all the others do because they spend money. Okay, and then the last bill that we have lent our support to this year is called Buy Clean, Buy Fair, which is a bill that's actually run quite a bit past years. Like this, if you go back and look at our past legislative priorities on our website, this has run for several years actually, and seems to be doing fairly successfully, seems to be doing fairly well this year. And so we'll see if it's able to get across the finish line. And what this bill is put forward by Washington Blue Green Alliance, which is a group that brings together labor and environmental groups together to pass legislation that benefits everyone. And so what this would do is put requirements on reporting the carbon content and working conditions that went into building materials that are then purchased and used for larger state-funded building projects. And so this doesn't establish any sort of like to be under this carbon intensity, or you have to like pay all of your workers this. Like all it does is say like, let's just look at this and see like in reality what the reality is. Bill also had an executive session today in the Senate Environment, Energy, and Technology Committee. And so Kate and I will be looking tomorrow to see, to confirm that it did indeed pass and didn't fail. Usually when things are scheduled for executive session, for the most part, it means that they're ready to take a vote on it, and they wouldn't take a vote on it unless it was going to pass. There's some exceptions to that when you're getting close to a cutoff date and there's limited time and you can't get everything through. But right now, where we're at in the legislative session, I feel fairly good about. I think this probably did pass today. Okay. That's what I've got for you all.
Thank you.
Yeah, and we'll be sending, we'll continue sending our weekly legislative alert updates to folks who have opted in to receive those emails. And then we'll also send occasional action alerts and updates to our whole community in Washington. So yeah, it's getting down to crunch time. And at this point, we've been at this point in the legislative session before where almost all of our stuff is already moving and isn't able to pass. And so it's exciting to have a year when, there's a couple things that would have been really great that haven't made it through, but a lot of things are still chugging along, looking pretty good. So that is good. Yeah, and they seem to have a fair amount of support. So yeah, we just need to get them across the finish line. Yeah, any last questions from folks? Now you're experts about all of this, so.
Thank you.
Bruce says no, but I bet you're an expert, Bruce. Okay, well, thanks everyone. I will send out a follow-up email hopefully tomorrow with updates on some of the bills we talked about, and then the links that we put in the chat in case people want to see those later, as well as a link to the recording, since I know a lot of folks want that. So
Have a good week.
thank you all. Take good care. Bye-bye.